Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast from a disappointing Timberwolves loss to the Philadelphia 76ers as Joel Embiid goes off to the tune of 51 points. Tyrese Maxey at 35. We'll break down what happened to the Wolves' defensive plan. Yes, free throws for Embiid and the rest of the Sixers were a big part of that. We'll break the whole thing down as well as some bright spots, what the Wolves did well offensively. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Thursday, everybody, and a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this is the post-game podcast following a loss to the Sixers. I mean, I don't know. It's disappointing, yes. Philadelphia is really good, and I want to get into what happened here and why I'm not completely disheartened by this loss. Yes, we'll talk a little bit of officiating. That's not the key here. The key is how the Wolves responded to the way the game is being officiated. For what it's worth, that's the focus here. I also thought the Wolves played pretty well for a good chunk of the game. Like Joel Embiid's just really good, and so is Tyrese Maxey. So we'll break all that down here today. Like I said, a big thank you if you do make Locked On Wolves your first listen. Of course, you can find this show free wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also watch on YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, CKEN. All right. Where do I want to start here? So the Wolves, like I predicted on Minnesota Basketball Party Wednesday, I thought the Wolves would win this game, but I also caution that this is a tough matchup for anybody. I just like the fact that the Wolves had the length to combat Maxey in the perimeter and they have size to throw at Joel Embiid. Now, the Wolves also this year, yes, they've been really good at defending without fouling in general, at least without allowing opponents to shoot free throws. If you take out garbage time, I believe cleaning the glass had them like 5th or 6th in the league in terms of opponent free throw rate defensively, which is great. But we also know the Wolves have historically, and by historically, I mean the last couple of years under Finch, have been really bad at defending without fouling. Like last year, they were bottom 3 in the league basically all season in terms of allowing opponents to get to the line a bunch. So that made me a little bit nervous coming into this game. When the Wolves beat the Sixers a couple weeks ago, of course, there was no Joel Embiid in that game for Philly. They were on a back-to-back. The Wolves had advantages, right? And they won fairly easily. They did a good enough job on Maxey. Nobody else hurt them. And I don't think there's any question that pound for pound, the Wolves roster is deeper and better. But Joel Embiid in this game was simply the best player on the floor. And Tyrese Maxey was, if he wasn't Maxey had some moments defensively where Jaden McDaniels made him look silly early in the game. But in the second half, Maxey was easily the second best player on the floor. And that's why the Wolves lost this game. Like if you want to boil it down to something very simple, my initial reaction to this one, and then I'll go kind of blow by blow here with some key takeaways. The Timberwolves officiating was a big part of this. And I don't think there's any way I can have an honest conversation about this game without acknowledging that. That said, it's not solely why the Wolves lost. It may have set the stage, the way the game was officiated may have set the stage for how the game ultimately went. But remember, Joel Embiid still made a lot of really tough shots in this game. Joel Embiid still shot 17 to 25 from the field. So let me rewind a little bit and explain how I think we got to this point. The Wolves started the game with the plan to be aggressive and get in Embiid's jersey the way that they guard Nikola Jokic and the way they tried to guard Zion Williamson, 9 days ago or whatever that was. I think it was a week ago Monday, 10 days ago. And their plans got blown up when, like, on the first possession, after the first offensive possession, like 22 seconds into the game, Rudy Gobert gets called for a silly off-ball, or loose ball foul. He basically just kind of hooked Embiid, trying to poke the ball away after Embiid secured a defensive rebound. It was a little bit ticky-tack, but, letter of the law, it was a foul, right? That's on Rudy for picking up that early foul. And then from that point forward, there were some ticky-tack fouls just here and there, and all of a sudden you have Rudy with 2, then you have Cat with 2. Before the end of the first quarter, Rudy, Cat, and Naz Reid each had 2 personal fouls before the first quarter was even over. A couple of them, yeah, they were ticky-tack. I think all of them, except for maybe one of the Towns fouls, was a legitimate foul. Legitimate in the sense that it's a foul by the letter of the law. I'm not at all saying that they should have all been called based on, like some of the stuff the Sixers got away with. But it is what it is. And the Wolves had to immediately adjust their defensive game plan because of that, because they couldn't, their big rotation was altered. And they also couldn't be as aggressive with Embiid. So instead of getting up in his jersey and trying to force him into taking a tough, like ultra contested fadeaway from 18 feet, he's now able to dribble up to the elbow, shoot a 15, 16 footer with basically not any real contest, no contests on him. Or without the Wolves getting a good contest on the shot, because they were so deathly afraid of picking up their third and then subsequently their fourth, fifth fouls, etc. And we saw like a good example of that is, I can't remember if it was end of third or early fourth quarter, Gobert guarding Embiid just above the elbow, got his hand in the cookie jar just a little bit. It was essentially the rip through move, but when you're doing it from the high post, when you're not doing it from outside the arc, and you're big, and you're Joel Embiid, they're not calling it a rip through. They're calling it a shot. And it was like he was bringing the ball up to shoot it, but it was very close to the old, the Chris Paul, James Harden, insert perimeter star here, rip through move, right? Kevin Martin used to do it all the time with the Wolves, 15 years ago or whatever. That's basically what that was. D'Lo does it all the time. But Rudy had his hand out and fouled him. Like, that's a combination of, like, seriously, this is what we're doing here. Like, frustrating, hard to watch, yes. But it is technically a foul, and it is Rudy not reacting appropriately. But the whole thing is set up by the way the game was officiated early and some of those silly fouls the Wolves took. So in this scenario, I think both are true. Both are true. Embiid got a lot of calls. The Wolves were culpable and then did not react well enough. And their game plan was altered by those early fouls, which again were partly their fault. More than partly, they were their fault, right? Like, you have to adapt to the way the game is being officiated. And then from that point forward, Embiid actually started this game 1 of 6 from the field. Joel Embiid did not make his second field goal in this game until the 6:38 mark of the second quarter. Think about that. The dude drops 51 in this game, and he didn't make his second shot from the field until almost exactly the midway point of the second quarter in this game, which tells you a couple of things. One, the Wolves' aggression on Joel Embiid was working early in the game. They were in his jersey. They caused him to start 1 of 6 from the field. He missed a couple of shots in the paint because he got the yips when Rudy was close. He practically airballed a layup at one point. I think it was second quarter. He missed a dunk at one point. The Wolves' plan was working. Now, at that point, he'd also shot a bunch of free throws. But if he's 1 of 6 from the field, you can kind of sort of live with that. You figure he'll miss a couple. Now he ended up shooting 17 of 18 from the line. But it was a combination of the Wolves' rotation getting messed up, them not being able to be as physical with Embiid in general. And then, that's really what it was early in this game. I'll tell you real quick, a mini soapbox before I get back to some of the other stuff. What kills me the most about the Embiid thing, and I already said he made 17 to 25 shots from the field. Like, he was really good. I'm not at all trying to take anything away from how good Joel Embiid is. But remember the putback that Karl-Anthony Towns had in the first quarter? The offensive rebound, I can't remember who missed, but he came streaking from like the left slot, just kind of cruised around Embiid, who thought he'd have an easy defensive rebound, grabbed the ball. I think that was the one who was like a one-hand, like left-handed tap in. Like, he just controlled it, left-handed tip with just one hand. Never brought the ball, never came down with it, and scored. And Embiid was like shrieking for a foul call. And it was like the least, it was the furthest thing from a foul. It was literally just an offensive rebound, didn't push him. There was marginal contact because Towns was blowing past a weak box out attempt. Embiid was trying to box somebody else out, maybe Rudy. It was not a foul on anybody. Like, Embiid didn't foul Cat didn't foul Embiid. It was just basketball. And here we were with Joel Embiid. Like, I actually rewound it because I was like, I must have missed something. No, there was nothing. It was nothing. And then the guy gets 18 free throws. That's what kills me. That's what, and like, I'm not going to do the whole, it's not even basketball. Like, in that particular play, it was just basketball, and it was a good thing there was no foul call. Embiid is good at what he does, right? What kills me is is that exact thing, is when the guy gets all the calls and then he still thinks he should get all the other calls, right? That's what gets me. But all that to say, I'm done talking about officiating the rest of the pod. I wanted to cover it initially because that obviously is a hot topic following this, and I can't just ignore that. But the Wolves, I guess, just like, also part of this, I should also say, related, the Wolves' plan was to be physical with Embiid and try to make him shoot 18 to 20 footers, right? Well, the Wolves also defensively, in general, their strategy is to make other teams always shoot the ball from, call it 16 to 19, 16 to 20, 16 to 21 feet, right? That's essentially how they've engineered their defense, right? With playing at the level or playing drop. The way that they funnel pick and rolls and the way that they defend the paint, they're okay with that. And most modern NBA defenses are, but the Wolves have done this, almost a quarter of the way through, or I'm sorry, almost a third of the way through the season, better than anybody else in the league. And to Embiid's credit, he made a bunch of those shots, and not all of them were wide open. The Wolves did a pretty good job still, getting within an arm's length of him. Now for Embiid, he's incredible, right? So it didn't really matter as the game wore on and he had a little bit more space. He was happy to just take those shots and make those shots. I mean, Philly came into the game, ninth in the league in terms of long mid-range shot frequency, and accuracy wise, they were third in the league. So Philly's happy to take those shots, and they're more than happy to make them. Philadelphia as a team is shooting over 48% coming into this game on long mid-range shots. That's shots from outside 14 feet inside the 3-point line. League average is 42%. So they're more than 6 points, almost 6.5 points better than league average from long mid-range, which is defined by cleaning the glasses over 14 feet, but inside the 3-point arc. Embiid himself in that same range is, let's see, where did it go? Over 52% this year. From actually, this is the Basketball Reference definition of long mid-range. So over 16 feet. So 16 feet to the 3-point line, he's 52%. He's actually 52% from 10 to 16 feet. So 10 feet to the 3-point line. Everything in between. Joel Embiid is shooting over 52% this year, which is just nutso. Like, that's crazy. So credit where credit is due. Embiid made those shots. The Wolves were thrown off of their game plan with the way that they committed those silly fouls early, and also the way the game was officiated. Combination of those things, and they got behind the 8 ball. I have another thought related to that. We'll get into some of the other stuff. We'll get into Maxey and how the game ended, or how things happened down the stretch in this one. We'll get into all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at eBay Motors. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week, we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. Let's see who Josh has picked out for us on this week's eBay Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. And I'll repeat what I said yesterday. Tyrese is who I would keep an eye out for. The Wolves haven't faced the Rockets yet. They do here in a couple of weeks for the first time this season. Houston's had a top 3 defense for much of the year. It's been like top 4, like Wolves, Boston, OKC, and Houston are kind of the top 4. But the Wolves will see Houston here in a little bit. Tari Eason's still coming off the bench for Houston, but it doesn't really matter because Ime Udoka's found minutes for him regardless. Eason is a strong fantasy value per minute option who becomes useful to everyone as his minutes tick upwards. Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. It's the same with your vehicle. My first car was a 95 Mercury Tracer, and I loved it. I wish I would have taken better care of it. Had to do with probably the age of the car and also the age of me at the time when I was driving it. But had eBay Motors been around at the time, I definitely would have taken better care of it, gotten the parts that I needed instead of, I'll be honest, letting it kind of waste away. But if you have a car that you need to fix to keep running, or maybe it is your first car, it's your kid's first car, whatever, eBay Motors is the place for you. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure that your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, one more thought related to the Wolves and their defense. And this is actually going back to the last loss the Wolves had. I mentioned it off the top, 10 days ago now, when Minnesota lost to New Orleans and they gave up 40 free throw attempts to Zion Williamson and the Pelicans. And that game, especially, even more so than this one, I did not come away from that, complaining about the actual calls of the game and like, hey, Zion got to the line so much, blah, blah, blah. It was more the way the game was officiated fairly. Right. There were just a lot of foul calls. I don't like watching games with a ton of free throws. I'd rather watch these guys, leave it all out on the floor, if you will, as the cliche goes. Let the players decide the game, as the cliche goes, especially in football and in basketball. That's my preference. But if the fouls are being called both directions and it's just a mucked up game and there's lots of free throws, fine. And that's what the Pelicans game was. This game was close to that. The Sixers committed more personal fouls than the Wolves did. They just led to less free throws. This was a little bit more on the side of like Embiid was getting all of these calls and nobody else was, but still, these are the types of games where the Wolves have to try and figure out what their counter is, right? If the game's going to be officiated tightly, the Wolves want to be physical defensively, and it's worked 20 out of 26 times this year, right? Like, they've won 20 times. They've only lost 6 games to the tune of they played defense to the tune of the number 1 defense in the league, the best effective field goal percentage, a solid defensive rebounding team, a pretty good opponent free throw rate, right? Like the Wolves have done well. If like 1 out of every 6 or 7 games is officiated this way, there's been a couple wins that were officiated this way and the Wolves still came out on top. So like erring on the side of let's be overly aggressive is totally fine. It's just really tough when it's your only line of defense against the reigning MVP. And that's what happened here. Like this, there's no shame in losing to Joel Embiid. There just isn't. And also when Tyrese Maxey gets 35, like if they're both going to go off, and by the way, not a single other Sixers player had more than 9 points in this game. Embiid had 51, Maxey had 35. They combined to shoot 29 of 49 from the field and go 23 of 24 from the free throw line, which is nuts. Like you can't expect them to make free throws at a 90, whatever that is, 95% clip or better every single night. Like that's not going to happen. They're not going to get to the line 24 times combined every night. They're not going to make 23 of them every night. They're not going to go 5 of 13 from 3 combined every night. Maxey made all 5 of those from outside the arc. Like the Sixers played such a good offensive game that you just got to, tip your cap, shake their hand, move on to the next one. It's a little bit, in some ways, what happened in that Kings game. Obviously this was more singularly dominated. Well, dually dominated, I guess. Actually, let's do that. Let's talk about the Wolves defense in the third quarter and Tyrese Maxey specifically. Second half, the Wolves actually did the thing they usually do in the third quarter. Like for most of the quarter, the Wolves they were down 4 at halftime and they built a lead of as great as 7 points in the third quarter of this game. And it kind of felt in that moment, midway through the third quarter, like, hey, this is comfortable. This is familiar. This is what the Wolves have been doing, is building these third quarter leads. Conley made a floater that put him up 7 points with like 7 minutes left, just, nearly the midway point of the third quarter. And then you had some weird stuff happen in there. You had the technical on Marcus Morris. You had Ant made just a crazy pass when he was doubled. Embiid got sucked up to double Ant because Ant kept going to that mid post up. Like basically the same spot on the floor that he hit that turnaround bank shot to basically seal the game the other night against Miami. And Embiid came up to try and double, and Ant made an impossible pass. And I need to see another angle of it. I've still only seen one angle because I had to watch the Sixers feed. I'd love to see another angle of it, but he dropped off a beautiful pass to Rudy for Rudy's first field goal of the game midway through the third quarter. But the Wolves were up, they were up multiple possessions. They're up 6 with 4.5 minutes left in the third. And then right at the end of the third quarter, there was it was an Embiid push. It was a 3-point play followed by a dunk. The 3-point play, I think, was after the Wolves put Kyle Anderson on Embiid, and he actually shut him down a couple consecutive possessions, forced Embiid to take some tough jumpers. I thought that was an astute adjustment by Chris Finch. Not that there were that many options at that point because of all the foul trouble and nothing else was working, but eventually, Embiid gets loose. He gets the end one. He gets another dunk before the end of the quarter, and the Wolves end up still being down by 3. So they were +1 in the third, which is not quite what we're accustomed to. It was their best quarter of the game, though, all things considered. And then in the fourth quarter, it was just a heavy dose of Tyrese Maxey, and the Wolves tried to chase him with Jaden McDaniels, which is the right move. And Maxey was just too good in this game. And Maxey's incredible, but he's not going to shoot 50% from the field and make 5 threes every night. And the Wolves made him turn it over 5 times. Like, he wasn't a super efficient 35 points. Or I should say the 35 points was efficient in terms of his, 5 turnovers to 5 assists was not the picture of efficiency from a point guard. The Sixers only had 20 assists on 45 shots, which is kind of a crazy disparity because there was so much in the way of, like, let's give the ball to Embiid and let him shoot a 17-footer, which was kind of crazy. The other thing that I'll point out here related to as the game wore on, the Sixers were actually only a +4 with Embiid on the floor. That means that the Wolves lost the non-Embiid minutes by 10 points. Yeah, that's correct. They lost the non-Embiid minutes by 10 points. And Marcus Morris Sr. was a game high +23 in this one. Nobody else on the Sixers was better than a +12. And I don't know that there's anything to point to here other than, like, Naz didn't have his best game. He just was off. He missed his first 2 or 3 3-point attempts. Could not make the Sixers pay for leaving him open in the corner multiple times, which was weirdly, like, the Wolves are a pick your poison situation for opposing defenses. And I get leaving Naz open if your other options are Ant and Cat and, Rudy diving to the rim or whatever. But for whatever reason, like, he was just left wide open and missed some shots. It just wasn't that effective. Nickeil Alexander-Walker wasn't that effective. I mean, for as deep as the Wolves are, and I said this earlier in the show, they're a deeper roster than Philly. The Sixers bench outplayed the Wolves bench in this game. And winning, it's not an option to not win the non-Embiid minutes, just like you can't win you can't lose the non-Jokic minutes when you play Denver. You have to win the non-Embiid minutes. And they couldn't do it. And even though the scoring wasn't there for the rest of the Sixers roster, again, nobody scored more than 9 points except for Embiid and Maxey. Embiid and Maxey combined for 86 of the Sixers' 127 points, which is, greater than 3/4 of their points. It's crazy. But that was enough to win because the Wolves didn't get enough from their bench defensively, to have a shot at this one. All right, a couple more final thoughts. We'll do individual studs and duds. We'll look at some of the overall stats for this one and, get you set real quick here for Wolves Lakers on Thursday night. So all that is upcoming here next. Today's episode is brought to us by our friends at BetterHelp. The show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Whether or not your family gives gifts during the holiday season, you get to define how you give to yourself. And the holidays are absolutely a great time to do that. So whether it's starting therapy, going easier on yourself during the tough moments in life, or treating yourself to a day of complete rest, which is absolutely important, I highly recommend doing that. Remember to give yourself some love this holiday season. Hopefully you get a little bit of time away from work or school or whatever it is you're doing. And there's a hustle and bustle around the holidays, right? Like, everybody's got commitments, places to be, people to see. It's important to just take a moment, and not just a moment, but maybe a full day. Just relax, take some time to yourself. And if you're considering starting therapy, I mean, it can absolutely be beneficial. And if you're looking into doing that, certainly give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. In the season of giving, give yourself what you need with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, a couple final thoughts before we close this thing out with studs and duds. I mentioned already that the Wolves did a good job on Embiid early. On the other side of the floor, the Wolves offense was carried early on by Jaden McDaniels. You had those quick fouls on Rudy and on Cat, and it was fine early in the game, but the Sixers tried to hide Maxey on Jaden McDaniels, similar to the Hawks have tried to hide, Trae Young on McDaniels earlier this year, I guess. Was that the first game? I think McDaniels, the first game he played was the Hawks game. We saw them do that last year, and McDaniels went to work. I get it, right? Like, other teams are like, who's the weak link? You have to pick somebody, and McDaniels is proving time and time again. The Wolves, it was just the other night. Was it the Mavs game or something? One of those games where the Wolves said, like, they just gave the ball to McDaniels. We're like, hey, man, just like, we trust you. Go score. And he can do that in spurts. And then it causes the other team to adjust how they're defending. And McDaniels had, I think, 19 points at halftime. Now he finished with 21 in this game, I think. Hang on. Yeah, he finished with 21. So the Sixers adjusted their strategy, and McDaniels was still effective, like 21 and efficient, 21 points on 12 shots in this game, was 2 of 3 outside the arc. So, McDaniels carried the offense early in the game. It was good to see him do that. And then I thought he was good on Maxey in the second half. Maxey was just really good. And he's one of the better guards in the league in terms of snaking through traffic and using screens. And McDaniels is the league's absolute best at navigating ball screens. He literally was last year, according to all the stats over at B-Ball Index. I spent a lot of time talking about it this offseason. And the Wolves have some of the league's best players, period, at navigating screens. And McDaniels, Conley, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, these guys are all really good, especially Nickeil Alexander-Walker getting skinny and avoiding contact on screens. And Maxey was just on point. Fantastic second half for Tyrese Maxey. I thought the Wolves in the first half, just like random notes here. The Wolves tried a 1-3-1 zone, which was fine, except for that if it breaks down, you've just got one guy on the back line, and a good passing team can beat that, pretty frequently. This is a team to try that against, because what does that do? It allows you to try and trap the ball somewhat in the middle of the floor. Part of the reason Embiid gets the ball where he does, and part of the reason the Wolves like to run horn sets so often. And I was clamoring last year when Cat was on the floor healthy for the Wolves to use him at the elbows more, because it's so hard to double at the elbows and at the nail at the free throw line. So the Wolves try to 1-3-1s, basically thinking this is almost a natural trap of sorts. If we can get Embiid to back up and shoot some threes, that's great. Like, we'd rather him be shooting threes. He's less effective there than he is getting to the free throw line, right? But he's a good enough passer, and the Sixers are a good enough offensive team that they were able to exploit that. The Wolves got out of it pretty quickly. But I thought that was pretty interesting. Quick before studs and duds, I'm going to throw up some stats if you're watching on YouTube. This is a weird one in that, both teams shot over 51% from the field. The Wolves actually made one more three-pointer. They had 3 more rebounds in this game. They also won points in the paint. The Wolves were a +10 in points in the paint. They were a +2 in offensive rebounds. They were a +5 in fast break points. So they won all these categories that we always talk about, this is actually the reverse of the other night when they lost a lot of these categories, but they won. I think that was the Heat game. They pretty confident it was the Heat game. This was the reverse of that. And it was because of the free throws. The Wolves were a -9 in terms of made free throws. They lost this game by 14. So that was obviously a huge chunk of that deficit. Again, a +3 in terms of points outside the arc, a -9 at the free throw line, a +2 in offensive rebounds, a +10 in points in the paint, a +5 in fast break points. So a lot of the other stuff, the Wolves did well. And this brings me kind of full circle to the point I started with. The Wolves, there's no shame in losing to the reigning MVP. There's no shame in losing on the road, especially to the reigning MVP. In a game that you're only down by 3 going to the fourth quarter, you're absolutely in this game. It was not a blowout by any means. And, if you have an officiating crew that decides to be a little bit less ticky-tack, a little bit less, whistle happy, if you will, the Wolves would have a shot at winning this one, right? I mean, it is what it is. And the Wolves, as I said at the beginning, have to adapt as much as possible. And it's not always, easy, and it's not always fair to do it, to have to do it, but it's part of the game. And that's something that the Wolves will need to figure out what to do. But again, this is a winning strategy. And in the playoffs, for the most part, even against superstars, you're not going to see everything called in the playoffs, right? That's not, nobody's going to want to see that. So the way that the Wolves play defense, I don't want them to change in general. And I think their strategy was correct. It's how they've defended Jokic. It's how they tried to defend Zion. And it depends on the officiating crew. And maybe that's a scouting report thing on the officiating crew. Like maybe the Wolves do that homework in advance and say like, hey, does this crew call, more shooting fouls? Does this, even look at how this team how officials officiate certain types of players, like the guys that are flopping and hunting foul calls, or the guys that are, everybody is, but like to that extent of Embiid or Harden or Chris Paul, or how do these guys officiate bigs in the post? Like I'm sure that there's data on that. I'm sure that it's like baseball teams always study umpire strike zones, etc. I'm sure there's data on it. It would make a lot of sense for the Wolves to really pay attention to that, and it wouldn't shock me at all if that was something that they were doing. And like, by the way, the strategy of the Wolves playing physically makes so much sense, right? Like there's nobody else in the league that's going to get free throws at this rate except for maybe Giannis. Certainly Giannis. Giannis actually has a higher free throw rate than Embiid. I mean, he's like the guy. Zion's, in the same neighborhood. It is what it is, right? Okay, quickly, individual studs and duds here to close out the show. Pretty easy on the Wolves side to look at this. I mean, I haven't really talked about Cat or Ant for that matter. I've spent a lot of time talking about other stuff today. Cat was 23 and 13, 9 of 14 shooting. I thought he played a good game. The foul trouble wasn't great. I thought he was less guilty than Gobert of picking up cheapies. Like I thought Towns, at least one of his calls I thought was a bad one. Shouldn't have been a foul call. I thought he was good. I thought Cat was very good in this game. There's nothing you can't sneeze at 23 and 13 and 9 of 14 shooting against the Sixers. It's a good game. Embiid was just otherworldly and had the assistance of all those free throw attempts. Ant was good too. 27, 7 and 5, only one turnover for Ant, 9 of 20 shooting, 7 of 8 at the line, 2 of 6 outside the arc. Again, a solid game across the board. He could have maybe done a little more defensively. He wasn't often matched up with Maxey, but it could have been a little bit more there. I don't know, 27, 7 and 5 with one turnover. Like that's a nice game. My third stud is going to be Jaden McDaniels. I actually thought he played well in this one. It would have been nice if he did more in the second half, but he did enough in the first half. He was like the reason this team was still in it at halftime because of all the foul trouble to the bigs, the poor game from Nas, the poor game from the bench. The Wolves were only down 4 at the half in large part due to Jaden. And yeah, it's tough to stick with Tyrese Maxey for, 30 plus minutes, but he did his best and Maxey just had a good game. So I'm going to give a stud to McDaniels as well. Dud for me is going to be, go a couple different directions with this one. I'll go, I'll name 2. I'll go Naz Reid. 10 points on 9 shots. Like that's not bad, right? Well, he had 4 turnovers in 20 minutes. I thought he was poor defensively, a couple of blow-bys, wasn't physical enough. Picked up those early fouls, sure, but not Naz's best game. And I think he'd tell you that, right? Like just he was part of that problem against Marcus Morris. And also when he was on the floor with Embiid, he just didn't do enough to provide resistance. I'll give the other one to Shake Milton. Shake kind of mysteriously was back in the rotation after getting his first, I think it was his first actual DNP CD. I know he'd played some garbage minutes in games where he wasn't in the regular rotation, but he didn't play at all against Miami. And he was in the rotation in this game in the first half and didn't play well. Had one turnover in 13 minutes, missed both of his shots. His turnover was he just stepped out of bounds. That was second half. I guess it was early in the second half. He did play a little bit in the third quarter too, rotation minutes. So not a good return to Philly. And my hunch is Finch was just like, we'll see if we can get lightning in a bottle with Shake here in Philadelphia. But that did not happen. So duds to Nas and Shake, studs to Ant, Cat, and Jaden McDaniels. I thought Rudy was fine except for the foul trouble. Not Rudy's best game. He only played 24 minutes. But Cat and Ant played well enough to win this game. It was just Embiid was too good. Maxey was too good. It is what it is. Now, Thursday night against the Lakers, back at Target Center, that's obviously a tall order to play on the second night of a back-to-back against a good team. Now, the Lakers are also on a back-to-back, and they actually just lost to Chicago. So their swoon continues after their in-season tournament win. I believe they've only won one game since their in-season tournament victory. They lost by 16 to the Bulls in Chicago. So both teams traveling to Minneapolis. The Lakers, though, are in the midst of a road trip. The Wolves come back home after playing the last few on the road. The last, 3 on the road, I believe. So, I mean, the Wolves will be favored in this game, and they should win. Nobody was on the injury report today, so it seems likely that the Wolves will have everybody in case anybody, comes up sore, the day after traveling. The Wolves only, their second back-to-back so far this season. So the Wolves are indeed favored by 5.5 points back at home. Remember, they're 11-1 at Target Center. So on Minnesota Basketball Party on Wednesday, I thought the Wolves would lose either the Kings game, which is upcoming on Saturday, or the Lakers game Thursday. I still think that's true. I think they lose one of the next two. The Kings game, there probably won't be favored in at Sacramento. It's going to be close, but they probably won't be. So now I'm kind of thinking, coming back after a loss, the Wolves may be able to buckle down and get this thing. I doubt both Anthony Davis and LeBron play for the Lakers. So that's probably factored into this line as well. So I'll say that the Wolves win. I don't know that they cover that 5.5 line, but I think they come out with a win against LA. And then that Sacramento game Saturday, we'll talk about it a little bit Friday, but that's going to be a tough one for the Wolves as well. All right, that's all we got for you today here at Locked On Wolves. A big thank you to those that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find the show. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV, and you can follow on X at Locked On T Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.